Welcome now, Congressman Michael McCaul, Chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for your time today and for coming into our studio. First of all, let me just ask you, do you expect the U.S.-North Korea summit to take place as expected?
You know, I do. I think the purpose of the meeting with the South Korean president in the White House today is to try to get both the United States and South Korea on the same page going into these negotiations. I know there's some setbacks by Kim Jong-un, but I think that's a lot of rhetoric. And what I'm hearing lately is that this would not be he's not going to denuclearize, automatically, but would rather look at a sort of phased-in approach where they would make concessions and then we would lift sanctions accordingly, but a more phased-in process, not just an overnight agreement.
Right. Recently, North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Kim Kye-gwan actually asking the U.S. that it should accept North Korea as a nuclear power. If that's the assumption, is it still worth a summit with them?
Well, I do think we shouldn't fear to negotiate, but not negotiate out of fear, as President Kennedy said. We need to negotiate out of strength. And I do think that's going to be one of the issues on the table, because that is the ultimate goal of the administration, is to take away their nuclear weapons capability, and that would be a major setback. I do, again, think that this is not going to be the overnight phenomenon we were hoping for, but rather maybe a phased-in approach over time.
So, Congressman, a phased-in approach is contrary to what some, at least from the White House, have insisted upon. For example, Mr. John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, has said, no, it's got to be all right up front. It's got to be irrevocable. Is Mr. Bolton, at this point, a constructive force in these talks? Because there are reports that the South Koreans really don't like him.
Well, I think his comments on Libya, obviously what happened with Gaddafi, I don't think Kim Jong-un wants that to happen to him, so that may have been a bit of a gaffe. But, I think, Bolton looks at the history of North Korea and how, time after time we've lifted sanctions just to negotiate with them. I don't think we ought to make that same mistake here. We had to lift sanctions after getting concessions.
Congressman, and just to interrupt you, we are seeing President Moon Jae-in of South Korea now arriving at the White House, shaking hands with President Trump. Of course, this coming after Moon Jae-in already met with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on April 27th. They're expected to discuss the upcoming U.S.-North Korea summit. Congressman, let me ask you, given that high-level talks between South Korea and North Korea have been canceled by Pyongyang, do you still expect South Korean President Moon Jae-in to act as a mediator between President Trump and Kim Jong-un?
I think he would facilitate that role, but I think it's important, again, for the United States and South Korea to be on the same page going into these talks. I do think they are going to happen because Kim Jong-un has everything to lose if he doesn't do this. We are putting maximum pressure on North Korea. And I talked to Mattis, had dinner with him at the Marine Barracks, and he talked about how we're putting, maximum pressure from a military standpoint so the diplomats can get their job done. And also, let's not forget China's role in this. They're not normally an ally, but here they are also putting a lot of pressure on North Korea to come to this negotiating table. That's why I'm optimistic that this meeting on June the 12th will take place.
Well, I was going to ask you, Congressman, exactly about that, the role of China in all this. Are we on the same page with China? And as a practical matter, did certain concessions we made, such as with ZTE, really help get us at least closer to the same page?
Well, I do think in this case, different goals here. I think China still wants a buffer between the United States and its border. I think South Korea would like to see a unified peninsula. I think the United States would probably like to see a unified peninsula. So I think the goals are a little different, but the pressure is there. I think Kim Jong-un is sort of like a bad stepchild to China that's very provocative with his ICBM capability that now can reach the United States of America. So it's a critical process that I think has to take place. But let's go with our eyes wide open to what the history of North Korea, what they've done in the past by getting out of the non-nuclear proliferation treaty, by promising things and getting concessions, and then basically pulling the rug out from underneath the United States. We don't want to get duped into another situation like that. And we've seen this over 3 presidencies consistently take place.
Congressman, I want to turn to another part of Homeland Security that you have real responsibility for, and that is immigration and how we control our borders. We've now had the agriculture bill get defeated in part because it didn't go far enough. I know you support Congressman Goodlatte. You and Congressman Goodlatte have a more forceful, I could put it that way, bill out there. Is there a danger of the best being the enemy of the good? Because there were reforms in that ag bill that would have taken some steps in your direction.
Yeah, it's a Goodlatte-McCall bill. My piece is a border security piece that's pretty widely accepted by the members in our conference. I mean, everybody wants the secure border. When you get into immigration, it gets a little more dicey, and we have a DACA fix in the bill, which I think is necessary. And I do think that, leadership has promised that the bill go to the floor. I think the question is going to be how modified the bill is by the time it gets to the floor, because the last thing we want to do is put it on the floor and have it fail. We'd rather make those modifications necessary to the immigration piece so we can get to 218 and pass it and send it to the Senate.
Yeah, exactly. When you talk about modifications, would that include considering a path to citizenship for Dreamers? Because the DACA fix that you're talking about does not include that. So could you be more generous towards Dreamers in order to get an immigration bill passed?
Well, I think there are existing pathways to citizenship. I think to create a special pathway for a certain class of people would be problematic on the Republican side, because it would be sort of viewed as amnesty. Where I do see some room for negotiation would be the DACA kids that have signed up, but also the DACA eligible children, which essentially doubles that number. And I think that's something that we're taking a look at. And remember that our leadership is actively talking to the White House. I've talked to the Secretary of Homeland Security about how can we get a bill that can pass not only the House, but House and Senate get signed into law.
Finally, Congressman, the Homeland Security depends critically on our law enforcement agencies. And right now, there's a lot of criticism, a lot of questioning of the FBI and the Justice Department. I wonder where the line of appropriate and necessary criticism leaves off and the point at which we start to undermine our national security. You remember the Church Committee, for example, and what happened there. I think a lot of people think that did not help our national security. Where is the line?
Well, I was just with the FBI Director, Wray, this morning in an election security classified briefing, and we talked about this very issue. I was a federal prosecutor for many years, and I still have, I want to have faith and confidence in the institution of the FBI. I think most Americans want to. I do think things like that FISA application that included, political opposition research from the opposing campaign being put into a application for a warrant on a U.S. citizen does raise some confidence issues, but I hope we can get to a place where, this whole informant thing, the FBI director has tasked an Inspector General investigation, and I think that's the right approach, and we'll abide by the findings of that IG report. But with respect to the FBI director himself, he's a man of great integrity and a very smart man, former prosecutor like myself, and I have a lot of confidence in him.
Okay, Congressman, we really appreciate your time today. It was extremely helpful. That's Congressman Michael McCall of Texas. He's chairman, of course, of the House Homeland Security Committee.